Bill informed me after I got on that the air conditioner doesn't work.
Now this field is 160 rods long, which is twice the length of my fields at home. So we're going to see that Steve is in the tractor with the grain cart attached to it, and since I can't make it all the way around from one end to the other before I can get back to the truck, I'm going to have to dump some of the corn into that grain cart that he's pulling with the tractor so that I don't have to deadhead all the way from the other end of the field down here to the truck just to dump. That takes a lot of extra time, and it's wear and tear and compaction in the soil. So he's going to follow me down there, and then we're going to dump into his cart. And then he brings the cart down here and dumps it into the truck. No more than I farm, I feel blessed to have this kind of equipment to use. Now, for the guys across the road that are farming 7,000 acres, they would not want to work under these conditions with this kind of equipment because this is antique compared to what they have. But it does what I need to do for the amount of acres I have. It's an efficient operation, and if I was farming 1,000 or more acres, I'd probably think about having to update some equipment, but without that many acres, I can't afford to do that, and I don't need to do that. So I've got controls here. My thumb controls raising and lowering the corn head. When I've got a soybean head on there that I run soybeans with, I've got another button there that'll raise the reel on the head. This also is hydrostatic drive, so I just have to push it forward to speed up or to push it back to slow down. I can do that. I have my hand on it all the time in case I see something that I need to stop for. Coming in the bin back there. Again, that's the amazing thing to me is the only thing that's going in that bin back there is clean corn. There's no stalks, no cobs, nothing but clean corn that goes through the combine and into that hopper.
And all you have to do is make sure you keep
in between the rows.
In between the rows.
Yeah.
Have you ever found anything interesting out in the middle of the cornfield while you're picking?
No, I don't guess I really have. Every once in a while you'll see a balloon that's flown out. You know, somebody will send a balloon. You may see a note attached to it, or you may not. It may just be a birthday balloon or something. But I always kind of want to pick them up to see if there was a note on it. Maybe it's come from a long ways away or something. But other than that, I really haven't found any. Now, a few years ago, I rented a different farm over closer to Oakville, and I was walking across that field one day, and I found an Indian relic, and I think it was called a bonnet, and it was had holes in it, and it was one of those things that they used as a necklace, kind of an ornamental piece for a necklace, and I had that in my truck for a few days, and the guy came to deliver fuel to my farm, And somehow we got to talking about Indian relics, and he said he collected them, and I showed him that bonnet, and he said, "I'll give you $200 for that today." And I had no idea what it was worth. And I thought, well, that sounds okay to me, so I gave it to him for $200. It's probably worth a lot more than that because it was in nice shape. But a lot of people for years have found a lot of arrowheads, other relics, but I have never really searched that hard for it. So this is storage for the equipment, and I usually have the combine sitting in here, and I have my tractor sitting over there, the green tractor. And then I've got a little bucket tractor that's so handy to have around the farm for so many different uses. And then I've got an old tractor there that my dad bought. That's a 1969 International 856. There's people that would like to have that for fixing it up for an antique, but I still do use it a little bit around the farm. Then I've got the corn planter here, which is all folded up. When it's attached to the tractor and it unfolds from the front, it becomes a 12-row corn planter, 30 inches wide each row.
So does this, am I looking at the front of it here?
You're looking at the front.
And that will open and spread out there?
Yeah, this attaches to the 3-point hitch of the tractor. All these hoses hook up to help. You take this loose, and the hydraulics will open this side and fold it completely out so that it's straight across 12 rows. And the yellow tanks hold what we call starter fertilizer, which you put, some people do, I put starter fertilizer 2 inches below and 2 inches beside the grain that I plant in the soil. And that's supposed to help get the plant, once it germinates, it helps get it up out of the ground quicker, gives it a little bit of strength to get going.
Is that dry or liquid?
It's liquid.
Liquid.
So each of those yellow tanks holds fertilizer, liquid fertilizer, that goes through the planter just like the seed does. The seed goes in these boxes. You can actually put about 2 bags of seed in a box, but I usually just put one in a box. And there's a mechanism in there that spins around that has a seed in every hole, and it drops the seed perfectly every time where it needs to go based on your speed of travel across the field. The fertilizer has an adjustment that you can make. You can put more fertilizer or less fertilizer on as you want. It's all run by air. There's an air vacuum back in the back there. It's in the center of the planter actually, that blows the seed down into the ground. It blows the seed up against a plate, and the plate goes around, and then it shoots down through a seed plant or a seed tube down into the ground. These are depth control so that you can figure how deep you want the corn plant to go. These are called seed firmers, and they try to keep that seed from bouncing out of the furrow as you're going down through the ground so that you get the best placement of seed in the ground as possible. Pretty good mechanism. And this is what I use. This is kind of being phased out, but this is what I use to plant soybeans. It's called a drill. It's a no-till drill, which means that I can go in there in those corn stalks and just plant beans, soybeans, right into the corn stalks. And it'll put them in the ground as far as I want to put them in the ground based on those depth wheels that it's got. And then it has a firmer wheel in the back that'll hold that seed down in the ground so that it doesn't pop out. Put a good soil covering over the top of it. And it's a 15-foot wide drill, and the planter, by it being 12 rows, is 30 feet. So the planter is twice the width of the drill. Doesn't really mean anything, but the updated version of this, these are 7.5 inch rows. The soybeans that I plant are 7.5 inches apart. Most of the guys nowadays are planting soybeans 15 inches apart. And some of the reason for that is they can save seed and still get as much yield from it as I can get with a 7.5 inch row. So by saving seed, which is up to $100 an acre to plant soybean seed, if they can save a little bit of that, gives them a little bit of an edge. The planter, I should go back and say, I usually plant about 34,000 kernels per acre of corn. And it puts that much in the ground within 400 or 500 seeds consistently, pretty much. And that's pretty amazing. And the kind of year that we've had this year, just about every seed has come up. They do some field checks for me from the fertilizer department locally, and all of the checks that they did for me this summer showed approximately 34,000 plants actually grew. That's pretty unusual, because a lot of times you'll get some weather conditions that will maybe cause one or two of those seeds in a row to not germinate for some reason based on soil conditions or weather conditions or whatever. But to have almost 100% emergence of the corn that you actually planted is pretty amazing. Soybeans, they say you can plant as few as 100,000 plants per acre and still get close to the maximum yield. I plant somewhere around 140,000 soybean seeds per acre. It usually gives me a good cover that I like, and I enjoy harvesting 7.5 inch row soybeans rather than 15 inch or 30 inch row soybeans. That's just a preference of mine, but it has worked well. I've got what I think is probably the prettiest, to me, field of soybeans that I've ever had this year, and it's all because this drill did its job. Weather conditions were right, timing was right, and weather since then has been ideal, but it hasn't had so much rain that it's flooded it out. Last year was one of the worst years I ever had. The corn made less than half of what it's making this year per acre. The soybeans, I think, are going to make 20 to 25% more soybeans than they did last year, just because the weather conditions last year were so bad with too much rain at too many times that it flooded it out. And some guys went in and replanted spots once, twice, sometimes even 3 times last year to try to get a consistent stand throughout the field, and it still didn't work in some cases. So every year is different. This is one of the best years as far as getting a crop up and getting maybe the maximum yield out of it that we could. The price, however, makes up for some of that fortune, because soybeans are $7.65 if I were to haul them in and not have them forward contracted, and that's probably about $1.50 a bushel or more below break-even cost. So that hurts. And if you didn't have some contracted earlier at a better price, you're going to suffer some consequences, I think, this year. Next year will be completely different. You just don't know what's available. You can forward contract now for next year, at a decent price probably is the thing to do. Some of that is based off of the futures market rather than the local cash market. And if you are savvy enough or have enough help from somebody that knows what they're doing to be able to take advantage of that, you can make a little bit of money maybe next year, but right now cash market price of soybeans next year looks dismal, mainly because of the tariffs, somewhat because of the bumper crop that we may be having, but primarily because of the tariff situation, because China bought 60% of our American soybeans. And there's a huge tariff on that now, so they've backed off completely on that. The tariff situation's hurt agriculture as much or more than anything has been hurt. But that's similar to what happened in 1980 when Jimmy Carter put the embargo on wheat to Russia because Russia had invaded one of the countries over there, and he didn't favor that, so he put an embargo on the wheat that we used to send to them that they relied on. And when they quit buying wheat and we had a glut of wheat, interest rates at that time were double digits, debt was high, we lost our markets. It was disaster on the farm during the 1980s, and would surely not like to see that happen again.
Okay, we've got the partnership here. I'm going to let Bill and Steve tell us a little bit, give us a little background on how they got hooked up together, how they started farming together. So one of you take charge here.
Well, I've been farming here on this farm. Mom and Dad had 90 acres, and then they bought another 30 acres across the road. So, and then they inherited 80 acres. So they ended up with 200 acres altogether. There's 100 acres on each side of the road. And I grew up with it. I loved it, enjoyed doing it, and have continued to play with it a little bit throughout the time that Mom and Dad were still farming, and they always worked off the farm. They never farmed full time. So I toyed around with it for a while, and then finally in 1987, I started farming on my own with Dad's equipment and with help from Dad and my brother-in-law, and farmed from 87 until now. And when I was always working off the farm, never farmed full time, I had about 200 acres here and another 115 acres beside me that I farmed, and that was about enough. Then the 115 acres beside me sold, and so I lost that and was down to 200 acres again. And with this equipment, I can do that in about 2 days' time. And so efficiently, I needed more acres. And so I had talked to Steve. Steve had a similar situation, and he can tell you about it, but his mom and dad had a farm there, and his dad farmed it. And like a majority of sons, it was difficult to continue to farm on your own, or you didn't have the desire to, or you just had other interests that you'd prefer to do. And I think that's probably what would lead into Steve's situation as far as his farm ownership and how he takes care of that.
Okay. Yeah, my farm, just try to give a little quick history as far back as I know. Actually, my great-grandfather moved his family here from Harrison County, Indiana, which is near New Albany, in 1900. And he had 4 kids, and one of those, his, at the time, 14-year-old son became my grandfather. My great-grandfather bought a farm just about a mile west of Cowan. And then when my grandfather grew up and got married, he bought a 40-acre farm that adjoined his father's farm. And then eventually my grandfather inherited 40 acres from his father. And so my grandparents had an 80-acre farm. And my dad, in about 1950, I think it was, bought an adjoining 40 acres to give us 120 acres there, the family farm where I live. And eventually, with the death of my parents, came to me. And I, of course, had known Bill pretty much all our lives. And so I knew that he was interested in adding some acreage, primarily after he retired from the bank. And so we got together and talked it over and decided we'd throw in together. He'd rent the farm and I would help out as much as I can. So that's pretty much the story.
Okay. I have a question here. I know you both have children, and does it concern you what will happen to your property when you two are no longer able to farm it? What are your plans long-term for your property?
Our property here, the 200 acres, is in a corporation. It was formed in 1978 by my parents as a method of estate planning. At that time, that was a method that was suggested, and they thought that would be a good way to treat the three of us children equally by gifting us shares of the corporation throughout time. They maintained a majority ownership while they were living. As they both are deceased now, the ownership of the 200 acres is jointly owned by my sister and her husband, who live in Winchester, my brother-in-law, who was married to my other sister, who's now deceased, and then me. So the three of us, families, equally own shares of stock in this farm corporation of the 200 acres. My situation, I think, is a lot different than Steve's in that at least one of those other siblings' family farms close by. So I know that they would be more than happy to farm this farm if I decided to either quit or I was deceased. My son, who's an orthopedic surgeon in Newcastle and Greenfield, has no interest in farming, and my daughter obviously has no interest in farming. So I guess I feel comfortable that it will continue on in the family, probably. I don't think that it'll be sold. I'd have no desire to sell my shares, and I don't think my sister in Winchester has any desire to do that. And they've mentioned, since I'm farming it, as long as I can make money and they can get some money from it, they don't see a sale of the farm as being imminent. So I think my feeling is that the farm will continue as a family farm corporation and farmed by some of the family in the long term.
My situation initially is similar to what Bill said. My father and mother and I in the late 70s, like Bill and his parents, formed a family farm corporation. And he's exactly right that the primary motivation for that was a lot of people were actually having to sell their family farms due to inheritance tax issues. And that was a way to not get into that situation and be able to pass the farm down from one generation to the next. Where my situation is different, I have no siblings. I have one daughter who has no siblings. And so when the corporation was initially formed, my dad owned some of the stock in the corporation, my mom owned some, and I owned some. At this point, so I own some of the shares of the stock, and my daughter owns some of the shares of the stock. There's nobody really to carry on the actual work. I haven't done it myself other than what I help Bill with. And so, when the time comes that I'm no longer around, I don't really know, what's going to happen. Does that worry me? No, things change. And so my daughter Katie, that'll be something, if I have any advance notice before I leave this planet, we can talk that over. But things won't change as long as I'm alive. I've been approached by a number of people wanting to buy some of the acreage, and that's not something I'm interested in. So once my daughter's in charge, then that'll be her decision, and that'll be fine.